I think phasing out and eliminating property tax is going to be something that the folks talk about in the state 100 years from now. There's been some governors around the country, including Ron DeSantis in Florida and a few others, that have also talked about doing something similar. I'm going to be the first one here to get it done.
Welcome to a special episode of the Searchlight Report, a podcast from South Dakota Searchlight. I'm your host, Megan O'Brien. I sat down for an interview with each of the Republicans seeking their party's nomination for governor in the June 2nd primary election. I asked each of them the same set of questions. Over the next 4 episodes, you'll hear more from each candidate about their goals for state policy on abortion, data centers, and economic development, among other topics. I also asked each candidate to share their big idea for South Dakota. You just heard from Toby Doeden of Aberdeen. Doeden is a dealer principal at Aberdeen Chrysler and has been involved in a number of other businesses and charities. This is his first run for public office. So, to start, this past legislative session, there had been a focus on abortion legislation, including restricting abortion medications from entering the state and defining what an abortion procedure is. As governor, do you see there being further need for abortion regulations and legislation? And what do you think that could look like?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, I think whenever we talk about the issue of abortion, uh, pro-life, we should establish what my position is, which is I believe life begins at conception and ends at natural death, and there ought not be any ifs, ands, or buts or any exceptions in between those 2 points. And so, as governor, I will do everything in my power to protect the unborn children. But I think this conversation also leads us down the path of why do some young women feel that abortion is their only way out of a specific situation, right? And um, I think some of those situations arise because of a lot of the climate in South Dakota that, frankly, has been ushered in by some of the career politicians. And I'm talking about affordability, right? I'm talking about law and order. But uh, from traveling the state exhaustively, Megan, for 2 years, I have talked to somebody from every walk of life in this state, including young mothers who have had abortions or are considering having abortions. And many of the young ladies I've talked to have indicated that affordability is a driving force oftentimes. And I think that's very sad. It's why, as governor, I'm running to make this state affordable again, to bring down costs for everybody, including folks on fixed incomes, young mothers, that find themselves in a very precarious position. And so that's my stance on that. I have compassion for all people, but I am as big of a fighter and supporter in pro-life as any person that you've ever met, and I will continue to be that way as governor.
Okay, so with abortion already being illegal in the state, except to preserve the life of the mother, do you see there needing to be any further legislation being introduced or kind of in conversation at all in the near future?
You know, banning the pills from coming in is a good first step. I think it's one of those issues where outside forces are always in perpetuity going to be trying to find a way to move our state further to the progressive left on this issue. And so, as governor, my team and I will constantly be monitoring external forces trying to sway and push things into our state and be very proactive to stop those before they get any traction. I think that's where the legislative side of this comes in.
Okay. Property tax reduction was obviously a pretty big conversation in the legislature this year. And while there were a lot of proposals introduced to reduce homeowner property tax, there were also some proposals that were introduced to expand and promote programs that already exist to provide relief to people who are veterans, people who are part of the elderly and disabled populations. Would you, as governor, want to increase the amount of South Dakotans taking advantage of those programs? And how would you do that? What would that look like if so?
I'm going to fix largely South Dakota's affordability issue for most residents, and I'm going to completely fix all of the housing issues when, as governor, I begin the process of completely phasing out all property taxes for South Dakota homeowners. South Dakota homeowners have seen their property tax double, in some cases, way more than double, just in the past 6 years alone. I've met hundreds of fixed income seniors that had to sell their homes or are considering selling their homes because they can't afford to live there anymore because of property taxes. Young folks are unable to buy homes at record levels because of property taxes. And so if you live in South Dakota, you are being significantly negatively impacted by property tax. And what we saw the past 2 years, Megan, in the state legislature was just another glaring example of how ineffective many of these long-term politicians are. I think there was more than 50 property tax bills put forth in 2 years. I think there was a few decent ones that would have at least gotten the ball rolling in the right direction. So when my administration came into office, we could pick that ball up and continue moving it toward a full phase out. But the problem is, Megan, our current governor, Larry Roden, and Speaker of the House, John Hanson, because they were in this race for governor, they wanted to put their name at the top of any property tax relief bill. So they systematically killed every other property tax relief bill. Again, some of those were for veterans, some were targeted toward fixed income folks. And rather than doing the right thing, they put their own two bills forward. And then when the dust settled, they passed, I think it was Senate Bill 245 and House Bill 96. They got very small homeowner reduction. I talked to somebody last night in Newell, South Dakota, up in Butte County. His reduction is $20 per year. But how are they paying for it? A 19% sales tax increase. The sales tax went from 4.2 to 4.5% on House Bill 96. And then Senate Bill 96, which gives the counties the option, raises the sales tax another 0.5%. So we're going to see a 19% sales tax increase starting in 2027, Megan. I don't know if you own a home or not, it doesn't matter. But if you are one of the 40% of South Dakotans that are having to rent today because owning is unaffordable, you're going to pay 19% more at the grocery store. Every time you buy something starting next year, Megan, every resident of this state, including non-property owners, are going to pay a 19% higher sales tax and get zero relief. And so as governor, I'm going there to get real solutions. I'm going to take my 30 years of my real world experience building companies, managing very complex financial systems, and we're going to actually start getting sales tax cuts, not just shifting the money from one tax to another.
How, I mean, you've been on this platform of eliminating property taxes in the state. How exactly do you plan to do that? Do you have kind of a, a step by step? What is that process going to look like then for your administration?
Absolutely. It's actually quite rudimentary and very simple. Old school money management, which the Republican Party used to have as their platform. It seems as though the Republican leadership in the state is now more of a progressive Democratic platform. Raise taxes, um, raise our state's budget, spend more money. I'm gonna do the opposite. Number one, my administration is going to be the first in more than a generation to actually cut spending at the state and county level. Well, how are we going to do that? Well, number one, I'm doing a full financial audit statewide, every single department, every nook, every cranny, line item by line item. Our state's budget has increased 38% since 2023, Megan. 3 short years, 38% increase in state spending. Plus, the county has increased almost the much. And what have we gotten for it? Our sales tax revenue is flat. Our economy is on life support. And property taxes have continued to go up and up. I believe we're going to find hundreds of millions of dollars in waste, inefficiencies, redundancies. So that's number one. I'm going to make South Dakota state government fiscally sound again. Number two, there are external revenue sources that are just waiting to be harvested and collected by South Dakota, but the career politicians have never even attempted because they like internal revenue. Internal revenue is the money that you pay out of your paycheck. It's the money that you pay in sales tax. It's the money you pay when you register your vehicle. That's internal tax. It comes from a resident of South Dakota. External revenue comes from non-South Dakota residents. We're talking about targeted visitor consumption tax. We're talking about, for the first time in our state's history, charging all the rich billionaires from around the world that are parking their money here in legacy trusts, charging them a small fee like every other state does. So I am going to bring in some new revenue that's not going to come from the taxpayers. It's called external revenue. And thirdly, and probably the most important, our economy, as I just mentioned a moment ago, has flatlined. Go back and look at the sales tax revenue our state has collected the last 4 years. You're going to find it has not increased since 2022. Yet our spending is up almost 40%. That's not sustainable. Why has our economy flatlined, Megan? Well, 10,000 small businesses have closed permanently since 2020. We have not attracted new small and medium-sized companies to come to South Dakota in years. We get a very small fraction of them. I was told that somewhere between 10 and 20,000 new businesses left less leftist liberal states in the past decade and settled in more conservative areas around the country, mostly the Midwest. Hardly any of them are coming here. Why? We have no state income tax. We have an amazing, beautiful state. We have low traffic compared to a lot of our neighboring states. Why aren't they coming here? Well, I'll tell you why. Because we've had career politicians serving as governor that are only operating out of their own self-interest. As soon as they get elected, Megan, they start raising more money. They plan their reelection, and then eventually they want to run for a higher office. And we've seen that very clearly in the last decade. So once the economy starts growing, and it will, once I start collecting external revenue, which we will, and once I cut all of the fat and pork out of our state budget, you are going to see very quickly, within a matter of a couple of years, a significant amount of annual budget surpluses. And yes, I will use that money to target the phase out of things like property tax on things like groceries and other household necessities. We will make South Dakota affordable again. It's not that complicated, and it won't take near as long as what the politicians are trying to convince people that it's going to take.
The State Department of Social Services has reported that more than 1,000 Medicaid enrollees in South Dakota could lose coverage once the federal work requirements take place next year. What do you plan to do about that?
Well, number one, our Medicaid spending has dramatically increased. Now, I know we extended coverage for more people, but that's not all of it. 90% increase in Medicaid expense in South Dakota since 2020. Yet the number of residents that live here is virtually the same, right? Well, I think that tells us two things. I think number one, it tells us that South Dakota, for some people, has, or for many people, I should say, has systematically become less and less affordable, and that need has increased. But number two, we have to audit our state Medicaid expenses. If you look nationally, and this has been documented many, many times, at a minimum, when other states have looked into Medicaid, they find 10% in fraudulent payments. So as governor, not just with Medicaid, but with every state program, once we cut out the waste, the fraud, the abuse, then and only then can we have an efficient system where we can start taking care of and helping the people that actually need it, right? And so our state has never audited our Medicaid, ever, not one single time. And so other states have done this and they found a minimum of 10% fraud. Well, Medicaid is now our largest line item budget. It's over $2 billion annually that comes through our state in Medicaid payments. 10% of that is $200 million. Why aren't we auditing our state departments? Why aren't we auditing Medicaid? If we know there's waste in the Medicaid system, and there is, we have to cut out the waste. We have to get efficient. Then we can figure out who's supposed to be on, who's not supposed to be on. But at the end of the day, our system of government in this country, and certainly in South Dakota, cannot continue double-digit Medicaid increases with no additional new revenue, right? Listen, I know times are hard for some people and they're down on their luck. Those people need assistance. My mom and dad were those people when I was a very young child. My father became disabled and we lived off of Social Security for several years. And without it, I don't know what we would have done. I think we probably would have been split up, my siblings and I. So I understand all of these programs are a necessity for many people. But I also know that many people abuse these programs. We've got to get the ones that are abusing these programs off the government's payroll, and then we can start actually allocating these funds to the people that need it.
What do you think that the state's role in economic development should be? And if elected, how do you plan to establish or continue that role?
I think the state's role in economic development should be helping our existing and second and third and fourth generation small businesses that are struggling in South Dakota. I've talked to many of them the last 2 years on the road. A lot of them, they wait months for SBA loans or they don't qualify because of some weird rule. Yet the governors keep wanting to spend literally tens of millions of dollars per year on low interest loans and grants to companies that are making millions of dollars a year. Like just Google GoAd payments for the past 5 years. I mean, it's a small third generation company struggles to get a $25,000 SBA loan. But if you want to build a new facility and you're an out of state company, you can get a $100 million TIF. You can get a low interest $20 million GoAd loan. How in the world does the governor of South Dakota have access to $100 million per year at his discretion to dole out in return for political favors? It's a very corrupt system. I think the governor's office of economic development uh, should be eliminated. I think that money needs to have more oversight. And I think that money needs to go back to the hardworking South Dakotans, the farmers, the ranchers, the small business owners that built this state. We have to invest back in rural South Dakota, not just Sioux Falls.
A lot of recently enacted laws in South Dakota could make it harder to vote, including new requirements for proof of citizenship when registering and a new way for people to challenge another person's ability to vote. What policies would you pursue as governor on voting access?
Anybody that complains about some of these actions that have been taken to make sure that only citizens of our state are voting are probably liberals that want to cheat in the elections. Like, pure and simple. Like, if you can't provide proof of citizenship, then you shouldn't vote. If you don't have a photo ID, then you shouldn't vote. When did it become okay, Megan, to make it easier for people that aren't citizens of this country to vote? Our forefathers would literally be flipping over in their graves at the fact that you and I are even having this conversation. Of course, you should have to prove that you're a citizen to vote in this country. Of course, you should have a photo ID. Look at where all the fraudulent elections have happened. It's in leftist liberal states where any kook can walk in with no ID and vote. I will continue to fight to make it harder and harder for these people to cheat South Dakota elections.
Regulations for data centers in South Dakota were also on the table for lawmakers this session. How do you plan to regulate them, if at all?
I plan to regulate data centers by not allowing them to come here. I mean, it's pretty much as simple as that. We should not be using massive amounts of taxpayer subsidized money to help build these multi-billion-dollar data centers that are owned by people like Mark Zuckerberg, Google, and many other I mean, some of the most wealthy, selfish people in the world, in my opinion. And the reason they're targeting South Dakota is because we have a lot of open space. There's not a lot of political power here. It's hard to raise money to fight against some of these things. We found that in a lot of other fights we've had, like Summit Carbon Solutions, which thankfully we won that one. There was a big push by out-of-state money to get Amendment G, the radical abortion bill, passed a couple of years ago. We defeated that. And so, as a capitalist, if a data center wants to go into a particular state and you know, they can get all the permitting and the local people where they're putting it approve of it, pretty hard to get in the way of that, right? That's what capitalism is. But capitalism should not be taking money from taxpayers in South Dakota that are already struggling to pay their property taxes. Taking more money from those folks and giving it to the wealthiest people in the world does not sit right with me. It should not sit right with any leader, any elected leader in the state. Anybody that is fighting to bring data centers to South Dakota using taxpayer subsidies um, is a very scary person to be leading our state. I'll leave it at that.
The western part of the state saw significantly less snow this this winter, and multiple wildfires have burned through thousands of acres in western counties. What role does the state play in making positive changes when it comes to climate change and environmental disaster? And how would you, if elected, make those changes?
Well, number one, I don't believe climate change has anything to do with the details in the question you asked. I mean, anybody that's taken the time to look back at our global weather patterns for the past however many thousands of years, you'll see that it's very cyclical. And they say it's warming now, but there were periods in our past where it was much warmer than it is today. But wildfires are a real concern. Again, not because of climate control, but because sometimes we don't get enough moisture and it's dry out here. And the folks I talk to, I'm actually out in West River right now. We have a huge event in Sturgis tonight. And I got asked this question at an event a couple of nights ago. And there was somebody there from the state that talked about how whenever they tried to enact new prevention services, new prevention policies, these things cost money. And they're constantly told by the representatives in their districts, and then eventually they're told by people from the executive office and peer, our state doesn't have enough money. Our state's broke. Even though our state's budget is increasing double digits every year, they're spending the money faster than they're taking it in. And so it's not just preventing wildfires, Megan. It's investing back in our rural healthcare, investing back in our rural infrastructure. Our K through 12 test scores are the lowest they have ever been in the history of the state. The rising drug epidemic is the worst it's ever been. Like none of these things are having the resources and the money and the energy and the time invested into them that they need to maintain our infrastructure because our state and our leaders like John Hanson, like Larry Roden, continue to overspend and overtax, and our state is broke. We cannot make any meaningful improvements in this state until we fix the broken financial system of our state government. It's as simple as that.
Where do you think that the state's relationship stands with tribal nations in the state? And how would you how would you plan to continue or develop that relationship if you're elected?
Well, that's a really great question. I'm glad you asked it. I went on a 66 county bus tour starting last summer and we concluded it last fall. And we're on our second tour right now. On the first bus tour, I went to all 9 reservations. We did, I think, almost 20 events combined on the reservations. No candidate running for governor or any other office in the state's history has ever gone and done as many events on the reservations as I did. I'm very proud of what my team and I did. I was the first Republican gubernatorial candidate to go into the heart of Pine Ridge in 40 years. Here's what I found out. This isn't secondhand information. This is from tribal leaders, and this is from citizens on the ground on the reservations. The 9 tribes are not getting along. They haven't for a long time, and they fight all the time. They don't like each other. That's a big problem. What can the governor of South Dakota do, or what can our state do to help out the reservations when the 9 reservations can't even speak amicably together, right? So that's number one. I think the new governor has to bridge a relationship back between the 9 reservations. Number two, law and order has virtually vanished on all 9 reservations. Crime is rampant. There's cartel activity. I have met with people firsthand. They can't even get the FBI to come out and investigate deaths on the reservation that are clearly at the hands of organized groups of people, likely cartel members. So until the reservations are ready and willing to get serious about helping the state bring back law and order on the reservations, it's going to be difficult, Megan, sadly. I mean, this is such a layered, complicated issue. I can tell you this, as governor, I intend immediately upon being sworn in as quickly as possible to bring leaders from all 9 reservations to the state capitol. I want to meet with them. I want to lay out expectations. And I want to tell them I will do everything in my power as your governor to help you and to help your folks on the reservations. But we have to have a good relationship, at least a good working relationship amongst the 9 reservations, number one. And number two, you have to help us bring law and order back to keep the reservation safe. And then we can start addressing some of the issues. And so I do look forward to doing that. I'm also very aware of how incredibly difficult it's going to be, but it's never stopped me from trying to fix problems. And I get tired of hearing people. I've had state leaders, I'd love to name them. Maybe after June 2nd, I will. I've had people tell me on this issue that it's too big to fix. It's too hard. You just waste. You're gonna waste time. You're gonna waste state resources. When, Megan, when did it become too hard to fix that we're not willing to fight to help 8% of the population? 8% of the people that live in South Dakota are on reservations. And so I don't like those folks too much that say the problem's too hard to fix. I think every problem needs to be worked on until we start to see meaningful improvement. And that's certainly what I intend to do on the reservations.
About half of the existing inmates in the state end up returning to prison within 3 years of their release. How will you, as governor, work to redirect those inmates?
Two issues. Number one, the reason our recidivism rate is 50%, I think it's nearly doubled since 2013. Well, what happened in 2013? Dusty Johnson was the chief of staff for then Governor Dugard. He pushed legislation for a bill that was called Senate Bill 70, more more known today as presumptive probation. Larry Roden was a state senator at the time. He whipped votes. He voted for it on the Senate floor. And John Hanson was a whip. He was a member of the House of Representatives, and he motioned it out of committee and voted for it as well on the House floor. So my 3 opponents, all 3 career politicians, are the reason that our recidivism rate has jumped to 50%. It's very sad. We need a governor that's going to be tough on law and order. I'm going to make the state a flyover zone for criminals, illegal immigrants, drug dealers. That's number one. We have to break down and fix our judicial system. Catch and release is not working. But specifically to answer your question, because I don't want you to think I'm dodging it, because I certainly am not. We have to do a lot better job at rehabilitation, treatment, and prevention services. I have talked to experts in the field that I trust that have had success for decades. That is how we lower the recidivism rate today. That is how we stop this revolving door of drug-related offenses. I mean, locking people up in prison for long periods of time because of narcotic use is not a good use of public taxpayer money. We have to rehabilitate them as quickly and as well as we possibly can as a state, and then we have to get them off the taxpayer's dime, right? And if they reoffend again, then let's rehabilitate them again. But those rehabilitation, those treatment, and those prevention services, if done correctly, do work overtime. Marty Jackley, who's our current attorney general, he went to federal court, Megan, and sued the big pharma companies in their own backyard and won $100 million lawsuit for the state of South Dakota. I think that money gets paid out to us over about a 10 or 12-year period. We've already received a little bit of it. Marty wants to use that money, and I completely agree with Marty. Marty said that money was supposed to be earmarked for treatment, for rehabilitation, and prevention services. Dusty Johnson and Larry Roden and John Hanson have all publicly said that they want to start a new government program, which, how many people are we going to hire? How much is that going to cost? They want to put that money essentially in a slush fund that they can use to dole out as they see fit. That is not where that federal court intended for that money to go. Marty Jackley is on record saying that money was not supposed to go to the government, that it was supposed to go to rehabilitation, treatment, and prevention services. As governor, that's exactly what I'm going to do.
So when we look back at the past governors of South Dakota, some have had some pretty defining impacts on the state. Peter Norbeck founded Custer State Park. George Mickelson had his year of reconciliation to strengthen relationships between the state and Native Americans. Bill Janklow used prison inmates to rewire the state's K-12 and university buildings for internet access. What is your big specific idea for South Dakota's future?
Well, I think phasing out and eliminating property tax is going to be something that the folks talk about in the state 100 years from now. There's been some governors around the country, including Ron DeSantis in Florida and a few others, that have also talked about doing something similar. I'm going to be the first one here to get it done. We're going to take the government off the backs of property and landowners for the first time in this country's history, first time in South Dakota history. That is going to be a landmark achievement. And number two, not to me specifically, but you mentioned it, and it's important enough for me to follow up on what Governor Janklow did by putting the inmates to work was an effective program. That has largely gone away. We don't do that anymore. So we're paying to house criminals in our state prison system, many of which are nonviolent criminals, okay? So we're paying to house them, but we're getting nothing in return. Why aren't we putting these folks to work, right? That's certainly one of the ideas I look at, will look at as governor in reinstating. I think Governor Janklow got that one right.
As a final question, is there anything else that you want the voters of South Dakota to know?
Well, there's a million things. I'll keep it very simple in under 30 seconds. I'm the only outsider running to be governor in this race. My three opponents combined have 60 years in state politics. John Hanson, Larry Roden combined have been in South Dakota politics for 40 years. I'm self-funding virtually my entire campaign. I think more than 99% of my campaign expense I have personally funded. I'm going to appear, not on behalf of the lobbyists or the big donors or the special interests. I'm going to appear to fight for the people, the taxpayers of the state. Every decision I make will be on behalf of them.
Doeden is one of 4 Republican candidates running for governor. The Republican primary election for governor is June 2nd, and early voting is underway. The winner of the Republican primary will advance to the November general election to face Democratic candidate Dan Allers. That's all we have for this episode of Searchlight Report. Audio for this episode of the podcast came from recordings by South Dakota Searchlight. The podcast is based on reporting by South Dakota Searchlight's staff, editor Seth Tupper, senior reporter John Holt, and reporters Joshua Heyer, Mackenzie Huber, and me. I write the scripts and produce the audio with editing by Seth Tupper. South Dakota Searchlight is part of States Newsroom, the nation's largest nonprofit news organization. Until next time, I'm South Dakota Searchlight's Megan O'Brien with the Searchlight Report.